How do you get unstuck in your business and back to growth? Well, that's exactly what we've been exploring in season 1 of your Business Growth Podcast. After interviewing and featuring over 27 different business owners who've started their business, grown it, and hit that inevitable plateau, we've unpacked their lessons learned, their biggest takeaways, their advice for fellow business owners, recommended resources, books, and so much more. What we're going to do in this season 1 recap is go through a number of the things we've talked about. For example, the common themes and tactics they've used, the surprising lessons I didn't expect, top book recommendations and how they use those books in their business, their top lead sources if they had to do it all over again, and how they use those lead sources in their business, as well as so much more. Now, we're going to be talking about a lot of the episodes from season 1. The links to all those episodes will be right in the show notes. So if you're wondering how you can find out more about a guest or the episode we did, all that is there. Just check the show notes. You'll have a link directly into the episode you're looking for. So, what are some of the bigger themes that we saw in this season 1? Well, a number of things you likely expected. For example, plateaus in business are inevitable. But to see that over and over again across all of our guest stories just reinforce that understanding that these plateaus do happen in your business. So it's not about avoiding them. It's about expecting them and making a plan as to what to do when you hit one of those inevitable growth plateaus. Yes, companies can have that rocket ship growth, but that kind of growth, that up and to the right hockey stick curve, that growth is never forever. Give it time, and that growth absolutely and does plateau and flatten out. And the strategies we talk about on the show are exactly what you can use to get unstuck and back to growth. Another theme that seemed to come up again and again as we talk to businesses is, depending on what stage you're at, different strategies will work better. If you have an idea for a business, but you haven't validated it yet, that's very different than a 5-figure business still finding their way, or a 6-figure business just starting to think about teams and growing beyond a founder-run business, which is very different than a 7-figure business that has established teams and sales channels and processes in place, which is very different than an 8-figure business working on operationalizing and leadership, which is vastly different than a 9-figure business just operating at a completely different level and scale. So some strategies might not feel right for you just yet, but that's okay. One of the cool things we did over season 1 is we actually organized all the episodes on our website based on not just industry, but also business size and tactics used and so much more. So if you're an 8-figure business and want to look at episodes of other 8-figure business owners, we have an easy index for you to find just those episodes. So what are some of the common themes that we saw across these businesses? Well, one thing that came up often was this idea of radical niching and specialization. Right in your business growth playbook, I talk about this. We go into how important it is to find a niche within your market and to go into that blue ocean as opposed to the hyper-competitive red ocean. For example, one of our guests, Wes Towers, he successfully specialized his web agency, and he narrowed into the construction and industrial trade sector. That let him move from like this high-effort custom projects and one-off things into a very streamlined system. Similarly, Nick Bonatadabas found that focusing exclusively on the senior care niche made him far more referable and allowed him to understand his customers' problems more deeply than a generalist just looking to help out any kind of business. Albert Butler touched on this. He's a CPA in the accounting space, and he moved his accounting firm away from these large, complex government proposals to focus on a higher profit niche within individual tax advisory and fractional CFO roles. And one last quick example of that is we had one of our guests on, Andrew Ackerman. He broke through a competitive plateau by niching almost sideways, shifting his accelerator program from a generalist model for early startups to a scale-up program specifically for later stage companies. All right, second theme we saw a lot of was the power of systems and automation. David Schomer talked about this. He's in the e-commerce space. He developed this product launch machine that consisted of a 60-step spreadsheet with accompanying Loom videos for his team to ensure that they could launch products without his direct involvement. And that is so key in that e-com space. Wes used ClickUp in his business to automate his client communications, ensuring that feedback was integrated into his project management system without requiring all this manual data entry. William Holston also talked about this. He transformed a side hustle into a sustainable business by goof-proofing his product design and creating a systematic method for testing his prototypes in the field. And one last quick example of this is Ari Rastegar used a scientific 100-point scientific diligence system. I love that, a scientific diligence system. That focused on the institutional risk controls so he could manage a billion-dollar portfolio with precision, even at that scale. All these folks and many of our guests beyond that were using systems for people and automation for software to run many aspects of their business and scale up. We also talk about in the book this idea of recurring revenue. It's one of the top levers to increase the frequency of transactions. And recurring revenue was a theme many of our guests used to grow their business. Wes Schaefer touched on this, one of our earlier episodes. He built up his stable business by focusing on residual affiliate income with SaaS platforms. This allowed him to earn a 30% commission whether he gets out of bed or not on any given day. He knows he has cash coming in from a lot of those affiliate commissions of products he uses and loves and also refers his clients to. Damian Zamora touched on this as well in his episode. He stabilized his company after a crash by doubling down on his mobile app subscription model. This provided consistent, predictable cash flow, which was needed to pay off $1 million in debt. Theme-wise, we also saw a fair amount of vertical integration. These are companies and business owners who start moving up their supply chain, and this comes up in the book by a similar name called Scaling Up. But if you work your way through your vendor list, you can look at where you send your money and ask yourself if you should be insourcing that or creating a complementary business. Leo Young in the real estate space, he touched on this about how he brought property management in-house for his manufactured housing communities to gain quality control and save his investors 60% or more on these management costs. Eric Lowe in the healthcare space transitioned his healthcare practice and his clinics from using part-time contractors to hiring full-time in-house physicians. That eliminated so many scheduling conflicts and, most importantly, improved that patient experience. Value-based pricing is a topic I love. I work with clients on this all the time, and we talk about this in the book. For our service providers or people who are paid money for time, this is really powerful. You're used to being paid for the time you spend versus the value you provide your clients. I have a great story I love to share in the book about this, about how we're able to add a zero to someone's price just by shifting from time-based pricing to that value-based pricing. One of my guests, Rachel Allen, touched on this in quintupling her prices after repositioning her services from mere copywriting to marketing strategy. This let her focus on the ROI and problem solving she provided rather than just the words that she wrote. Very different perspective. One has a high value, one is just a commodity fee for service. Lance Psycho also implemented this in his business. He's an architect, and he added in a high-margin expedite fee that allowed his clients to pay double his standard fee to have their architectural projects completed in half the time. So these are all ways that you're able to provide value and be paid for doing that. One last thematic strategy I want to touch on that we saw again and again was education-based selling. Ted Miller III talked about this in terms of how he created over $100 million by committing to adding value through education first, and he did this through workshops to teach his prospects before ever even pitching a service. And Stefan Bajayo also talks about this in terms of adding $10 million in additional revenue to their business by creating enablement services, essentially getting clients to pay for education so they could better drive the sophisticated SEO race car that they had purchased. Now, some of these lessons you may have heard or read about in the book, but a few strategies and things that we heard thematically might surprise you. One, oftentimes we think about scaling as being a matter of adding more people to the company and just scaling by throwing bodies at it. But there is almost a contrarian view that we saw from a number of our guests, and that is scaling with fewer people. Especially now in the age of AI, many companies have either pulled back on their hiring, instead scaling up with AI and automation, or they've had layoffs replacing work that was previously done by AI and systems in their business. So scaling with fewer people is something we may even be seeing a lot more of going forward. Now, Sean Boehm talked about this when he shared how they quadrupled the revenue of their business while actually reducing the size of his sales team. Instead, they focused on higher tier service levels and more efficient prospect qualification processes. This let them do more with less and led to huge growth. Michael Ritzema found that his company grew through acquisitions to 50 employees. This allowed him to wear fewer hats and focus purely on his role as a CEO. Additionally, his team members were able to narrow down and niche within the company. For example, he shared how he had a team member who could now just be the firewall guy. Instead of everyone needing to know everything about IT, they could have that kind of specialization. And Lance Psycho, who we mentioned earlier, he made the intentional decision to cap his staff at 12 people. He discovered that exceeding this power of 12 resulted in a poor customer service and lower profit margins. So he found this throughout history and throughout other businesses and applied the rule in his own business with much success. In fact, his entire episode is all around this power of 12. Another thing that came up that might surprise especially our newer or younger business owners is that this whole hustle trap, this whole hustle economy is real. And it's not always a great thing. It's not about working more hours to grow the business. It's about working smarter. And that if you do just hustle harder, that often leads you towards burnout. Ryan Crownholm, one of our earlier guests in the series, in fact, wrote a whole book around this hustle trap. Simone Little touches on this. In her episode, she shares the story about how she realized that her 17-hour workdays were destroying her quality of life. And she eventually fired all of her clients to take a 6-week sabbatical and redesign her business for health and freedom. Ryan, who we touched on, the author of the book around the hustle trap, was forced to escape this when a major accident left him in a wheelchair. That required him to build a system where his staff could operate without the sort of brute force presence needed in earlier, younger businesses when you feel like you've got to be there for every single thing in the business. A topic that came up that I didn't expect from a few of our guests was around bankruptcy. Many of us think about that and see that as the end of the road, when our guests really had that as a reset in their life that let them get back to growth. John Chantanarode shared about how this was like the atomic bomb that he had with a high debt bankruptcy, and that let him snap out of this ego-driven chase for gross revenue and let him rebuild around a lean, profit-first company that prioritizes family and profitability. Dom Cassone shared about how he successfully rebuilt his credit and business after a personal bankruptcy, treating the experience as a hard lesson in setting limits around risky ventures. That let him put some guardrails in place and guide his future decision-making. And last surprise lesson that came from any of these episodes was how AI is being used as a collaborative partner by so many. Not necessarily as a replacement, but as an assistant side by side. Emily Crookston, she works with authors, and she shared about how she's using AI to double her ghostwriting output while creating a lower-priced AI-assisted service tier for her DIY authors who previously couldn't afford her services. It doesn't replace what she's doing, it just allows her to have a more profitable and more entry-level tier for her prospects. Len May with EndoDNA, he shared about how he's integrated machine learning into his genetic wellness platform to help doctors safely interpret complex DNA data and suggest precise treatment protocols. Now, you, like me, like all of our guests, like most business owners, are avid book readers. We love reading. So it was interesting to hear what book titles came up again and again from our guests that were these pivotal, important books for them in their business. Of course, thematically, it's in the show. Your Business Growth Playbook, the book that I wrote, is covered in every single episode. That, of course, is a must-read. If you haven't read that, go out, get yourself a copy right now. If you want the audiobook, I narrate that. You're listening to this. You love my voice. I love my voice. You can have my voice narrating the book for you, too. So that's Your Business Growth Playbook. That'll help you figure out all the strategies my guests talk about and so much more to get unstuck and back to the growth that you deserve. Traction, or EOS, by Gino Wickman is a fantastic read, a book I've recommended to so many people and bought so many copies of as a gift for folks. Virginia Elder brought this book up as being really impactful in her business. David Schomer, Michael Ritzema, and Lance Psycho all talked about this book and how it was helpful to them in their business. So that's Traction by Gino Wickman. The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt is a foundational book when we're talking about the theory of constraints, or TOC. This is a process I use in my business, I use with my clients all the time, I recommend highly and even cover within my own book. This was specifically cited as a major influence as well by Andrew Ackerman and very much so by David Hilton. The Trillion Dollar Coach by Bill Campbell came up a number of times. This is a book on high-level leadership and Silicon Valley mentorship. This was mentioned specifically by Ari Rastegar and Sean Boehm. They highlighted its lessons on working with different personality types and managing executive roles. No surprise, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. That's a standard for time management and priority setting. This was recommended by Michael Ritzema, while Dom Casson frequently referenced the same principles regarding the tyranny of the urgent versus the important. The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss came up. This is instrumental in guests escaping that hustle trap and redesigning their businesses for lifestyle and delegation. It was cited by Wes Towers and Mark Walden as a guide for phasing yourself out of the day-to-day operations. One of the topics I love talking about is entrepreneurial freedom. That only comes from not just having a business, but having the right systems and people to run those systems. And this is a great book around that topic. One of my favorites as well is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. This was recommended for its focus on maintaining a burning desire and a success-oriented identity. Both Nick Bonatadabas and Mark Walton credit it for shaping their early entrepreneurial development, and I personally credit that highly as well. I'd be remiss not to mention a number of great runner-ups as well that came up from our guests. Of course, Profit First by Mike Michalowicz, Success Principles by Jack Canfield, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. He's got some other great books too. Principles by Ray Dalio, The Gap and the Gain by Dan Sullivan, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and Little Bets by Peter Sims. Where are folks getting new business? What are their favorite top lead sources? Well, one that came up often, especially for B2B businesses, is LinkedIn, both organic and direct outreach. This was credited as like the primary platform for high-value B2B or business-to-business connections and authority building. And in fact, for some of our guests, like John Chantanaro and Rachel Allen, this was their primary growth engine. Strategic referrals and networks. This comes up in a number of episodes in terms of leveraging centers of influence, or COIs, and existing relationships to find high-trust clients with near zero acquisition costs. Michael Ritzema derives 1/3 of his opportunities from these centers of influences and referrals. Embedded partnerships and joint ventures is a strategy I love. I've launched businesses on. I cover in the book with a number of great stories as well. And this effectively allowed many of our guests to partner with larger guerrilla companies that are already working with their ideal customers. Right? Sam Berman scaled his brand by getting the largest logistics company in the world to sell his product as an integrated part of their service. Damien Zamora found that his biggest success was by getting his pre-approval stamp for merchant accounts embedded into the kits sold by other business opportunity companies. All these allow somebody else's customer base to easily onboard with you because of that partnership. And it's such a powerful strategy. Speaking comes up. In fact, David Newman wrote a great book on this, as well as many other folks, about how to get out there and use speaking as a way of getting new business. This comes down to really you being seen as that authority and by being the specialist in the right targeted room. Virginia Elder found that her most successful clients and connections came from speaking at and attending niche industry events, in her case, FinCon. Last one, again, no surprise for lead generation, is PPC, or paid ads. And specifically with one little nuance that came up a few times is using paid ads for market validation to test an idea out. In fact, we talked about earlier in book recommendations, Tim Ferriss and the 4-Hour Workweek. He cites this as his strategy for testing out his ideas, using PPC, running ads, to even test the title ideas for his book. Stefan Bajayo recommends using paid ads as a canary in a coal mine to quickly test if a message or offer converts before committing to a larger marketing strategy. Many of us have used this in our businesses. It's a great way to just really see if your message matches your audience, your message market match. And you can figure out, do you need to adjust your messaging or your market, or what has to change to get you the result that you're looking for. Now, when it comes to advice, I love asking fellow business owners, especially those that have been there and done this kind of stuff again and again, like what their piece of advice is for fellow business owners who are feeling stuck. Thematically, we saw a number of things come up again and again. One is sort of like embracing this radical niching and specialization. This came from almost every guest. Narrow your focus to a specific industry or customer profile. In the book, we talk about your avatar or your ideal customer profile, ICP, and how to build that. This lets you reduce your competition and increase your operational efficiency. In one of my episodes with Wes Towers, he shared about a nightmare experience when he deviated from his construction niche to build a dating website. His lead developer quit shortly after the project began, leaving Wes to figure out this unfamiliar technology alone in his off hours. And this distraction not only cost him money, it prevents him from marketing to his core, more profitable clients. Nick also shares how he initially tried to help all small businesses with video marketing, but found he was not referable because people didn't really know what he did. Once he committed strictly to the senior care niche, a client told him she hired him specifically because you know the industry, proving again that specialists really understand industry problems better than generalists. There's a phrase, riches and niches. It really shines through again and again in stories from our guests. All right, prioritizing action over perfection. I talk about this in the book about how action is what gets you results, or as some of our guests have said, action creates clarity. We had many guests who advised business owners to stop getting ready to get ready and instead test ideas in the real world to get that immediate feedback, even if the product or the plan is imperfect. Andrew Ackerman, in fact, had a whole process around this. He recommends a method using 3x5 index cards to sketch out an app interface, in this case, like a mobile application. By having users touch an index card and swipe these cards and verbalize their thoughts, founders can see where users get confused before writing a single line of code. This saves a massive amount of time and capital. William Holston also did this. He built his first product, Pitch Burst. This was a carnival game from Home Depot plywood and had it at a local charity event. The immediate viral demand from people asking to buy the game served as a real-world test that revealed a path forward faster than any 40-page business plan ever could. A third thing that came up was building systems to escape that hustle trap. The theme that I kept seeing was that you can redesign your business so it's not dependent upon the founders, brute force, or constant daily involvement. This allows us business owners and founders to step away from the business into a strategic or more creative role. It lets us be that visionary in the business. Simone Little was previously working 17 hours a day, and in her episode, she shares how she realized burnout is actually a structural issue that cannot be fixed with simple self-care. She took a rather risky 6-week sabbatical, letting go all of her clients without a plan. And that forced her to rebuild her business with a structure that finally supports her life as a strategic fractional COO, a vastly different business model than she had before. Ryan Crownholm, in his episode, touches on this as well, about how he was trapped in the hustle of running his construction company until a truck left him in a wheelchair, unable to drive to job sites. He was forced to build systems and trust his staff. What he discovered was that his team was highly competent and that his physical presence had been a key risk to the company all along. Ultimately, this allowed him to double his business year over year over year. And lastly, in terms of advice for other business owners, know your numbers and monitor your leading indicators. Many of our guests emphasize how you can't manage what you don't measure. This comes down to, as a business owner, using scorecards to catch problems before they hit your bank account. John Chantanarode talked about how he hit this prestigious $100K month, his first $100,000 in revenue month, but realized that the business was a Titanic, heading for an iceberg because the high overhead was masking his lack of profit. After a rather high debt bankruptcy, he now manages via a weekly scorecard of leading indicators. He can look at how many people are showing up and how many calls are getting booked, and that can tell him what kind of revenue and profit he can expect down the road. This kind of course correction before there's a problem lets you really rearrange from looking at trailing indicators like a low bank balance and shifts you into leading indicators like those calls booked, show rates, and so forth. And one last story around that, one of my guests, David Schilmer, is in the e-commerce space, and he employs a strict fail on paper exercise where he refuses to sell a product unless it is priced at 3 times the landing cost or more. By calculating every shipping, advertising, and storage cost before placing an order, he's able to ensure a healthy profit margin before any money is spent on buying inventory. So that's our season 1, which has been packed with phenomenal guests and great stories and lessons learned. But what's coming in season 2? Well, we're going to be having more amazing interviews with 7, 8, and 9-figure business owners who've grown their business, hit that inevitable plateau, and then found their way back to growth. We're going to dig into what those strategies are, how they got unstuck, and what they changed so that they could get back and be on that trajectory to growth, to successful exits, to entrepreneurial freedom, and so much more. We'll also continue digging into, and I'll be asking about, what books had a real impact on them and their business. We're all lifelong learners, but there's an endless amount of content out there to read and consume, so we're going to find out what books really made a difference. And I've really enjoyed asking our guests about if they had to do things all over again and launch a new business, what their top lead source would be. And we're going to find out what those are so you can implement those in your business, learning from the lessons of our guests. Now, do you know somebody who might be a great guest for the show? Maybe they're a 7, 8, or 9-figure business owner. They got stuck, but then you've seen them shift back and get to that growth they deserve. I'd love to talk to them. I always have a link in the show notes to apply as a guest on the show so we can go through and see if you have the story that we're looking to share with our guests and if we'll have good lessons there that we can all learn from. So check out that link in the show notes and share that link with a business owner you know who's gotten stuck and back to growth. Lastly, and most importantly, one of the greatest things I've enjoyed over producing this first season of the show is seeing all the new subscribers we have across our various platforms, the feedback I get from our listeners who reach out direct, which you totally can and should do as well. But the only way we get more listeners and can support production of a show like this is from you. So if you're not already subscribed, do that right now. Please rate and review the show. That provides that proof and validation others are looking for to know this is a show very much worth their while. And of course, share the episodes out with the people in your life who you know need them. So again, subscribe, rate, review, and share. And thank you for tuning in and making season 1 such a success. I'm so excited for the guests we already have booked and lined up in our upcoming season 2 of Your Business Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Shapiro. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in our next episode.